It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Conservative MP Scott Benton, Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell, the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson, and the political editor of Politics Home, Kate Proctor. Today, Labour says the Sue Gray report into parties in Downing Street must be published in full.
The Prime Minister has said he will publish it in full, he must publish it in full, and if he won't publish it in full, then we will take every step that we can to make sure that information is in the public domain.
This from a government minister.
We intend to publish the full findings of that report, but at the same time, as the PM said, it's entirely right for the police who've chosen to investigate these matters. I hope when they conclude their investigations, that will provide welcome clarity.
Was this defection of a Tory MP a boon or an embarrassment for Labour?
The problem with the Labour Party today, Mr. Speaker, is that he's a lawyer, not a leader.
And is there anything wrong with being a lawyer? Let's start with masks, because from today, people in England no longer have to wear them by law. It's a personal choice as to whether you continue to wear a face mask or covering. Fraser, what will you do with yours?
I will throw it away unless I'm about to meet somebody who would rather I wore it. I mean, I guess it's a matter of basic manners from now on. If the government gives you a free hand, you can work out, am I going to see somebody who would feel a bit discomforted, a bit unnerved if I wasn't wearing a mask? If so, you put one on. But I think most people like to see each other's faces. I think I can't wait for the restoration of that basic humanity to begin again. Lucy, what about you? What will you do with your face mask from today?
Well, I'll still wear it at times, especially in shops where those shop workers want me to wear it, and on trains and in busy enclosed areas. I mean, look, like Fraser and everybody else, we can't wait to get rid of these measures and get rid of our masks and get back to life as normal. But we're not quite there yet, and I think it's respectful, especially to those who work in these frontline jobs who are meeting people every day in their jobs. I think it's respectful to them that we continue to sort of wear masks in those kind of environments.
Scott, what about you? It is recommended still by the government that you wear face coverings in crowded, enclosed spaces, but it is no longer a rule.
Absolutely. I think it's up to each individual how they see going forward and what they are comfortable doing. Mine will go firmly in the bin unless I'm meeting people who are vulnerable or would rather, for example, in a surgery setting, me keep my mask on. And this is yet another example of, on the big calls, the government getting this right. Last summer, we eased restrictions. That was the right thing to do. The calls before Christmas, including by the Labour Party for additional restrictions, were completely wrong. And I'm delighted we're one of a few completely open societies in the world, and that will be welcomed by millions of people.
Kate?
As someone who wears glasses and big earrings, I'll be really happy to not be wearing masks anymore. I've ruined a lot of earrings. And like everyone else on the panel, common sense and wear it if someone requests it. I would have no problem with that.
All right, well, I can't quite believe I'm saying this, or maybe I can, but we're still waiting for the Sue Gray report into parties at Downing Street and across Whitehall. For it to be published, it is completed. Fraser, what's happening?
Well, nobody knows. I mean, right now, the government is sitting there with the report. It's not working out, I suspect, how much can we get away with redacting. Now, Boris Johnson has said that he'd basically publish the whole thing. There is a case for taking out, for example, the names of a junior civil servant who might have been invited to one of these parties. Would you really want that person's name out there, hounded on social media, etc.? So you can see the kind of common sense case for taking some of the information out. But you'll notice Therese Coffey's language. She says that the findings will be published in full. Not the report, but the findings. That suggests they are preparing a summary, a redaction. And that, I think, would cause quite a lot of angst amongst Tory MPs.
Tory MPs, and what about you, Lucy?
Well, we want it published in full. I think that's the only way, frankly, to begin to draw a line under this sorry, tawdry affair that's been a huge distraction for government and for all of us from the big issues facing my constituents right now, the cost of living crisis and various other things that they want us to be talking about here and now. So I just think, they've got to get everything out here and lay it there for us all to see, because otherwise we're just not going to be able to move on from it. And the government said they would publish it, and they should publish it.
Scott?
The public expect the report in full to be published. I would expect that to happen. The Prime Minister's been clear on a number of occasions in the House of Commons. However, as Fraser said, in a number of examples here, we could be dealing with fairly junior civil servants, and protect themselves and to avoid them being hounded in the press and on social media. It may be reasonable, I think, to redact certain names within the report, but clearly the findings need to be published in full.
Right. What will you do, or how will you feel about the Prime Minister if it isn't published in full, apart from the caveats that you've just expressed? Your colleague Bart Harbour, former Chief Whip, said the report must be published in full. Any attempt to conceal or suppress crucial details would be wrong. Do you agree with him?
Well, the Prime Minister's been clear on a number of occasions in the House of Commons. The findings of the report will be published in full. I personally would expect the whole report to be published, but we will wait and see what happens next week.
You heard Lisa Nandy there in the headlines for Labour, Kate, saying that they will use any lever at their disposal to insist that the report is published in full, perhaps not just the findings. What could they do?
Well, there are some parliamentary mechanisms, techniques. I mean, I think humble address is something you can do to get documents out in the public. But then this is an independent civil service inquiry, so it's quite hard to know what's at the disposal of Labour if they want to be the body that tries to get it out in full. I mean, I think it would be so sensible if the government just addressed this correctly, made it as fulsome as they possibly can. If it's a one page of findings, that is going to satisfy absolutely nobody. It sounds to me like Boris Johnson is saying more fulsome things than actually his own cabinet and his ministers are in their media rounds, because they keep on referring to findings, but the impression is Boris Johnson wants it to go further. I think if they're sensible, it'll be as much detail as possible.
Right. I mean, Scott, would you vote with Labour in that situation? If it is just a page of findings and Labour do use something like a humble address, a direct message to the Queen to actually sort of force the government to provide those documents, would you vote with them?
Well, that's entirely hypothetical. The Prime Minister's been clear on a number of occasions the report will be published in full. That's my understanding. It was listening to the Prime Minister last week in the House. It was listening to him yesterday as well. So that's what we're expecting. I mean, the Prime Minister and the whole government know what's at stake here. The Prime Minister's apologised, and rightly so, for wrongdoings which have happened in Number 10 over the course of COVID. The British public rightly expect the facts. We need to draw a line under the situation and move on, and we can only do that if the report in full is published.
Has this bought him time, Boris Johnson?
I'm not sure. I mean, if he doesn't publish it in full, it will drag this out longer. It will leak. Of course it will leak. It's in Downing Street, the second leakiest place in London. The first is the Metropolitan Police has also got the report. So there's no doubt that this will come out. So you can see him just making this worse for himself. He's very good at that, Boris Johnson. If he told the whole truth, first off, we wouldn't be subjected to this leak, drip, drip, drip that he's getting right now. So he seems to have this instinct inside him that, no, maybe we can conceal a little bit and maybe it will make it better. It never does. It always makes it worse. So no, I wouldn't rule out his ability to make this bad situation even worse.
Right. I mean, Lucy, what else can Labour do, though, while we wait for this report, and if it does come out and you're not satisfied with what you're seeing?
Well, there are parliamentary mechanisms and we'll explore all of those. But, I mean, it really would be, a fitting end, a very sorry end to this whole long drawn-out process, to be honest. Every fact and bit of information about this whole situation has been dragged kicking and screaming from Number 10 and from the Prime Minister. And as I say, I think it would be quite fitting but appalling if the way in which they wanted to bring an end to that was that they weren't even prepared to fully publish the report into all of these goings on. And I think, yes, you may have an argument about protecting some people's privacy, but what if some of those names are politicians, are the Prime Minister, are those who have said in Parliament one thing that's now going to turn out to not be the truth. So I think the best way to stop any further speculation about this is to get it out there. Let us all read it. Let us all look and make our own minds up. I think most people already have made their minds up anyway. but we need to really see it in full at the earliest opportunity.
In the meantime, though, there is something of a concerted operation going on to shore up Boris Johnson's support. Endless conversations with Conservative MPs who are unhappy. Have you been spoken to, by the way, by the Prime Minister?
I'm fully supportive of the Prime Minister. My feelings are on the record. I've been doing the rounds in support of him. I mean, this is a gentleman with a huge mandate from the British people. I wouldn't have won my seat without the Prime Minister's personal support and people voting for him to be Prime Minister.
So there's nothing that Sue Gray or in that report, then, that could persuade you otherwise? You'll continue to support the Prime Minister, whatever is said in the report?
Well, let's see what the report says. But the Prime Minister has a proven track record. He's delivered Brexit. We've got the fastest growing economy in the G7. I think the British public are sick and tired of hearing the drip, drip, drip about stories. The man's got a mandate. Let's let him crack on and deliver for the British people.
Well, one of the tactics, Fraser, that is being adopted in this operation to shore up support that Scott is obviously part of. Let's just show you this tweet from Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary. It is about a change in leadership. If there were to be an election, if those 54 letters of no confidence were to go in and it triggered a leadership election, then a new leader would have to hold a general election. So Blair, as example of why we won't need a general election, is wrong. It was yonks ago, Blair to Brown. Smooth pre-announced handover, no leadership election. Brown was still pressured to go, bottled it and then lost. Very different times pre-rolling 24-hour news and social media.
Yeah, that's, of course, she's saying to the Tory MPs, look, I know a lot of you guys seen the opinion polls, you think you won't keep your seats next time. Don't think getting rid of Boris Johnson will help you because you'll be subjected to an election sooner rather than later. Of course, what she says isn't accurate. A new Prime Minister could have an election any time that he or she chose. That's the way our system works. I think it'd be rather tricky, though. I think that an election, as we saw with Theresa May, the new Prime Ministers do want their own mandates. I mean, this election was a Boris Johnson election victory. There are quite a few MPs who, without Boris, simply wouldn't be there. So I do think morally it's a bit hard for the Tory MPs collectively to say, look, you guys might have voted for that Boris Johnson, but we think that Liz Truss would be better, so let's just put her in and we'll keep you for another 2 or 3 years. So there is, I think, moral pressure, but no obligation.
Right. Well, one thing that Boris Johnson could do to retain some support, according to these newspapers, is delay the rise in national insurance expected in April. Well, it's going ahead at the moment. Let's just show you this headline in the Daily Mail. Tory MPs tell Boris, spike tax hike and we will back you. It's also a headline in The Telegraph about the same subject. National insurance rise will push up prices, PM is warned, as we already have record levels of inflation at the moment. Do you still support, Scott, the planned national insurance rise?
Well, this is a government who are giving unprecedented sums to the NHS and education, £36 billion extra going into the NHS to deal with the COVID backlog. And look, if people want top quality public services, we have to pay for them. I was very uneasy about the rise in national insurance. With the positive borrowing figures at the weekend, in fact, we were borrowing less because the economy is now going. I think there is room for the Treasury to revisit this issue, and I would fully support the NIC increase being postponed or scrapped altogether. But we do have to pay for public services somehow. There's no getting away from that fact.
Lucy?
Well, look, I mean, I think this is just another example as to why the Prime Minister is now unable to lead. Not only is he distracted from addressing these cost of living crisis issues, from energy to tax increases and so on, he's unable to offer the country any solution on these issues, which is what most people want to talk to me about when I'm walking around here in Manchester. But he's now also over a barrel with his sort of backbench Tory MPs, many of whom actually don't want to see investment in public services. We thought this was the wrong way to raise those much needed funds because it hits working people entirely. It's not a fair tax in that sense. So earnings earned by other means through rent, for example, or shareholdings and so on, are not subject to this tax increase. So it's an unfair tax hitting working people. But we do need to invest in this backlog in the NHS, in the necessary catch-up that we need in education and in the housing crisis. And now Boris is just unable to lead, I'm afraid.
Scott?
Well, Labour have committed £400 billion in extra spending, and yet they've identified £5 billion in tax rises as to how they would pay for it. Labour are completely uncredible when it comes to the economy and public expenditure.
That's absolute nonsense, Scott.
No, I'm afraid it isn't.
You might have got that off your sort of whip's hand out, but it's not absolutely not true at all. All the plans that we've put forward so far, and we'll go to a full manifesto process, are fully costed plans.
I think even Lucy, that's ludicrous.
We'll come forward with our tax and spend.
Although Lucy,
you know yours is ludicrous. Where's your 400 billion come from, Scott? Where does that figure come from? Tell me how that was made up of.
Where is the 400 billion?
Well, every time we hear Labour ministers at the dispatch box, whether it be universal credit, transport, educational catch-up, you keep pledging money, and yet on no occasions do you identify where this funding will come from. It's why you're still untrusted on taxes and the economy.
Nonsense.
Nobody believes a word Labour say on these issues, Lucy, I'm
afraid. I tell you what, Scott. We've got a fully costed plan about how we're going to reduce people's energy bills, because we're going to bring in a windfall tax on the North Sea oil and the gas companies who've made huge
another
profits,
new tax from Labour. There's a novelty.
A windfall tax on these big companies who've made huge profits off the back of ordinary working people who've had to pay higher energy costs. And we're going to use that money to reduce people's energy bills by £400 or £600 a year, £400 a year or £600 a year, depending on whether you're
so not even you know the figures.
They're the exact figures. 400 for some households, 600 for others. And that's what we're going to do. Labour's got a plan. It's fully costed. It's fair. It's addressing the issues that people face. People are going to see a 50% increase in their energy costs. You're the government, and you've got absolutely nothing to say to people about that. Nothing at all. Because you're too busy in the tea rooms plotting with each other and having to have conversations about who's going to be leading your party.
What is your plan?
And all our plans are fully costed.
Right, what is your plan, Scott, the government's plan to bring down energy bills?
Well, we're already helping people with the cost of living, so we've just cut a universal credit taper rate. That's £1,000 extra for 2 million families, which Lucy, by the way, voted against, as did all Labour MPs. The national living wage is now up to £9.50, and I suspect very strongly over the next few months the Chancellor will come out with a bespoke package for low-income families on fuel support, and rightly so. So I'm sure we'll see something before April on that. But Labour's solution, cutting VAT on energy bills, is £1 a week. Families are suffering in my constituency, and the best Labour can come up with is £1 a week. It's pretty pathetic.
No, it's not £1 a week. I've just explained to you how it's a lot more than that.
Kate?
The government is about to put up national insurance for people. That's going to hit people in their pockets. So I can't really see the difference between, attacking Labour there on another new tax when you were about to introduce another new tax.
And the Tories are about to take taxes to a 71-year high. And the worst thing is that Scott and every Tory MP stood for election on a manifesto pledge not to increase national insurance. This is a pledge. You say to the vote, you don't break a manifesto pledge lightly. Now, they don't even have to break it now because the public finances are such that tax revenues are £18 billion higher than they thought. So, of course, they can afford to cut this £12 billion tax increase. But instead, if the Tories go ahead with it, they break their pledge, they lose all credibility in future when it comes to saying to Labour, we don't trust your promises because the Tories broke theirs. And they're doing it voluntarily. I think this is a political disaster waiting to happen.
Scott?
Well, the COVID pandemic was in nobody's manifesto. We've spent £400 billion supporting, keeping people in work through furlough, supporting businesses, huge, vast sums to the NHS, and ultimately this has to be paid for. I don't support the rise in NIC. As Fraser said, I think we can look at that now the borrowing figures look better, and I suspect Downing Street and the Treasury will do so. But at the end of the day, if people want record sums going into the schools, police and the NHS, we have to pay for it. We've got a sustainable programme of doing so and managing the public finances, which I'm afraid Lucy and her party just do not have.
Right, let's talk about the latest difficulty for Boris Johnson, which emerged yesterday while we were on air during Prime Minister's questions. It's over the evacuation of animals from Afghanistan during the fall of Kabul. This is what Boris Johnson said in response to questions about whether he intervened to make this happen in December last year.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee has been hearing from an official who says the response to the situation in Kabul was chaotic, and has suggested that you yourself intervened to try and get the Nowzad animals out, and they got priority over some Afghan people. Did you intervene that way?
No, that's complete nonsense. But what I can tell you is that I think that the operation of pitting to airlift 15,000 people out of Kabul in the way that we did over the summer was one of the outstanding military achievements of the last 50 years or more.
The Prime Minister there dismissing claims that he intervened in that evacuation of the Nowzad charity run by the former Royal Marine Pen Farthing. But yesterday, an email from an official in the Minister Zach Goldsmith's office suggests he was involved and, in fact, authorised it to happen. Let's just have a look at this extract from one of the emails. It was released by the Select Committee yesterday, and it says the Prime Minister has just authorised their staff and animals to be evacuated. Scott, how do you square both those things?
Well, Prime Minister was clear. He didn't give his agreement for this evacuation. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, was completely in control. He has confirmed that, as have other ministers. The Prime Minister at no point intervened. I think that's quite clear. In terms of the email excerpt you've just put there on the screen, it wouldn't be the first time civil servants or people working in various departments have alleged that ministers or the Prime Minister supports policy A, B or C to try and give that extra credibility and to drive it through.
Really, extra credibility? An official in a department actually stating in email, in writing, that they've got the authorisation or had the authorisation of the Prime Minister?
Absolutely. If you speak to ministers, quite routinely, sometimes their officials or senior servants will suggest ministers support this to support their own agenda within that department. The Prime Minister's been clear, but let's not distract here from the brilliant success of Operation Pitting. 15,000 people, best ever evacuation programme in peacetime by the British Army and the FCO. I think that deserves a huge amount of admiration, and at all times people were prioritised over animals, and rightly so, as the Defence Secretary and Prime Minister have both said.
Well, Lucy, very clear where Scott stands.
Well, I mean, honestly, he's deluded. I mean, firstly, how outrageous slur against independent and voiceless civil servants.
Oh, come on, Lucy. You know how the process works. To cover up. No, I don't actually. I don't believe that people who are paid civil servants would lie in emails because of their own agendas. I mean, that's a ludicrous thing to say, to cover up for basically a Prime Minister who you just cannot believe a word he says. He's so used to lying, it's so embedded in his persona that he doesn't know truth from lie anymore. We all know people like that. Sometimes our kids get like that, don't they? Where they're so convinced with the lies that they tell all the time that they themselves can't discern the difference between truth and lie. And this is just another example of that for the Prime Minister. And it's pretty outrageous to wheel out a backbencher to come on this programme to blame a civil servant for that, when quite clearly this is something that came from the Prime Minister. And I think some of the accounts of Trudy Harrison's involvement, as well as his PPS, in reference to the boss wants this, the boss wants that, would also suggest that's the case. So you can't believe a word, I'm afraid, this Prime Minister says anymore.
Right. Fraser, how damaging is this story?
It's not quite the smoking gun that some say that it is. I mean, Zach Goldsmith could have been getting the wrong end of a stick. He could be embellishing it for his own reasons. An official saying the PM wants it isn't proof that the PM ordered it. Now, that proof might arrive, I don't know. But right now, this email itself, it's embarrassing for him, but I'm afraid to say it doesn't prove anything.
I think, yeah, there's ways of perhaps, suggesting you'd like something to be done without having a paper trail. And it sounds to me as if there is no, at this stage, direct email from the PM to say, I'd like this done. It's really weird that his PPS was getting so involved in this, Trudy Harrison. And it's one of these things where it would be much better if the government could give a more fulsome explanation as to what's gone on here, because at the moment it sounds like a civil servant has perhaps not been telling the truth. So we need to know, what's true, what's not, just give more information.
Right, well, just to be fair to Zach Goldsmith, let's read his tweet in response to this story as it emerged yesterday. I did not authorise and do not support anything anything that would have put animals' lives ahead of people's. My position, which I made clear publicly, was that the UK should prioritise evacuating people. I never discussed the Nowzad charity or their efforts to evacuate animals with the Prime Minister. Well, we will find out if there are any new developments on that story over the coming days and weeks. Now, the Prime Minister made an attempt yesterday at Prime Minister's questions to shift the subject away from the issues of his leadership and trailed a new announcement, which is covered here in The Guardian. Universal credit claimants face tough sanctions in UK job crackdown. Job seekers will have just 4 weeks to find employment in their preferred sector under the government's Way to Work campaign. What's this policy about, Scott?
Well, at the moment, we've got a jobs miracle in the UK. We've got more people in work than before the pandemic. 1 million vacancies.
What does this policy say?
Well, we've got 1 million vacancies, and I'll give you a local situation in Blackpool. We have 2,000 people unemployed in my constituency, 1,000 job vacancies, and I speak to employers, whether it be hotels, cafes, they advertise jobs, and hardly anybody, on some occasions, nobody at all, comes forward to take those jobs. So this policy is about encouraging people who are out of work, claiming benefit, to take those jobs on offer, and rightly so, because if you're unemployed and relying on the state and taxpayers to support you, it's not unreasonable to expect you to make every effort to find a job, and that's what we're doing.
That's the current situation. But what's this policy going to do to encourage, as you call it, people to take these jobs?
Well, if somebody's unemployed, for example, at the moment you've got 3 months to have a look in your chosen field. So, for example, if you're a social care worker, 3 months to have a look to find a social care job. Under these plans, you would have 4 weeks in your preferred field, and then you would have to open up to look at other parts of the economy.
And if you don't?
Well, there are jobs on offer at the moment.
Yeah, but if you don't, what happens? I mean, what is the stick in this instance?
Well, if people are persistent in refusing work and expecting the taxpayer to support them, that's completely wrong. And I think the vast majority of your viewers would expect people who can work to work. And if the government has to give them a nudge to do so, then so be it, because the vast majority of my constituents work hard and are sick and tired of those who abuse the welfare state. And that's what this is about.
Lucy, what do you think of this policy in principle?
Well, I mean, it's not as Scott is outlining there. I think this is just more kind of red meat policies here for the Tory backbenchers.
Yeah, but what's wrong with the policy about persuading people to look for jobs, perhaps not their preferred one, but jobs that are vacant?
OK, because it's not about persuading people, it's about sanctioning people. And there's clear evidence that these kind of sanctions don't have the outcomes that Scott is describing. It's not the issue that we face in our labour market at the moment. People generally who are on universal credit are rolling in and out of universal credit into work reasonably quickly. It's about making sure that people do have the right fit for them. So that might not just be around skills, because it might be that people don't have the appropriate skills for the vacancies they're being forced to apply for, but it might also be around childcare issues and hours. So, for example, if you were a part-time shop worker and you've been made redundant, and then you're being sort of forced to look at working late night in a bar, those numbers don't add up for you, because who can look after your children when you're working late nights in hospitality instead of working during the school day? So it's in the economy, it's in all of our interests to get people fitted to the right jobs for them so that they stay in that job. And it's also in the whole country's interest to have people in the most high-skilled jobs they can do, because then they earn more over their lifetime. They're reliant less on housing benefit and universal credit and other things to top up their income. So we've got to meet these gaps with the skills that people need, with the childcare that people need, not with sanctions that will actually not solve the problem at all.
Scott?
Well, I'm not sure why anybody would believe the Labour Party or Lucy on jobs. Every single Labour government has left unemployment higher than when they came to office.
Respond to the points that she's making in terms of sanctions being introduced if you don't actually look for jobs that are outside your preferred sector?
Well, the number of people sanctioned who are out of work is very, very small. So let's put this whole conversation into context. There's a wider issue, as Lucy rightly says here,
so
about
what's the policy then?
Well, there's a wider issue here, Lucy, if you let me finish, as I've said, about equipping people with the skills. That's why we've got a lifetime skills guarantee introduced by the Education Secretary. That's why we're spending £5 billion equipping people with the skills they need to find jobs. So we have a long-term plan for jobs, and that's exactly what we're delivering with a booming economy. And yet again, Lucy speaks about the Conservative policies because you've got none of your own as an opposition. 2 years in, and we're still waiting for Labour policies.
Is there proof it'll work, this policy? It'll get more people into those vacancies?
No, there isn't really proof, and I could cite 3 reports, and they are from 2018, but this is pre-pandemic, that say that sanctions don't work. And the DWP has a report itself. They felt that it, in some cases it doesn't work because it can damage the relationship between the claimant and the job coach. That's a DWP report in itself. You've got, the welfare conditionality study that was done over 5 years. They say it doesn't work, but Scott is right. It is a very unique position at the moment where you have so many vacancies, and it might be that the DWP is thinking, let's give this a whirl again. Let's see if sanctions can work. It can encourage people into those jobs. But the thing is, if you're not skilled to do that job, it can lead to really patchy employment. It can lead to 4 weeks in one kind of job because it's not actually what you want to do. So there are instances where people only do these kind of jobs for a few months, and it doesn't lead to long-term employment. And I think that's something that Lucy was trying to explain as well.
Lucy also mentioned the politics of this, part of the operation again to shore up support for Boris Johnson. Do you think, Fraser, it's actually going to work? Are people listening?
I do think this Get Tough Welfare is electorally popular. I think the Tory MPs will like it. And by and large, this worked well for the Tories in the last decade. The thing that the Cameron government got right was moving a record number of people from welfare into work. And right now we're in a very strange situation where there's never been more vacancies in the economy. You've got a lot of people who are coming out of the pandemic because jobs might not be there anymore. So you've got this really uncomfortable disalignment, a very difficult period. And I think the more vacancies there are, the more the government will be inclined to take a tough position, saying, look, the average taxpayer on 25 grand is simply not going to support somebody who's turning down a job at that level and wanting one. So I think that the tough love will be the default position for the next few months.
All right. Well, yesterday, a former Labour MP, Laura Pidcock, quit the party's ruling body known as the NEC, National Executive Committee. Let's just show you her tweet. Today, she says, I resigned from the National Executive Committee of UK Labour. Please read my full statement below or full text here. She cited, amongst other things, that Labour has become hostile territory for socialists under Keir Starmer and that the leadership lacked vision. Let's talk to Mish Rahman, a member of the Labour Party's ruling body and of the National Coordinating Group of Socialist Momentum. That was started up as a grassroots organisation to support Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader. Mish, first of all, welcome to the programme. What did you make of the news that Laura Pidcock had resigned her position?
Thanks, Jo. Thanks for inviting me. Look, I'm very sympathetic of Laura's decision to resign from the NEC. I myself have no intention to resign, and will continue to represent Labour Party members. And I may as well take this opportunity to declare that I'll be re-standing again when it's time to be re-elected. But I think it's emblematic of the problems that the Labour Party has, where there's deep division within its ranks amongst members, where the party's former 2-time elected leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has had the whip removed from him by Keir Starmer personally, despite the party's own disciplinary process reinstating Jeremy as a Labour member. I mean, this is in direct contradiction of the EHRC report, which states that there must not be any political interference in party disciplinary matters. And this is at the same time, Jo, as we recently gave the whip to a Tory defector MP who described the Labour Party as a bunch of, using the C word, and who's just as responsible as any other Tory MP and this government for the increased amount of people that are having to resort to food banks and rising the cost of living, as well as the racist Tory legislature, such as the police and crime sentencing bill.
As you know, we've got Lucy Powell here. What do you say in response to the specifics that Mish has outlined, but also just generally there are divisions and the left is being alienated?
Well, actually, I think the Labour Party's never been, in the last few years anyway, we're a lot more united today than we have been in recent years. The Labour Party is a broad church. We've always been a very broad church, and that extends from Laura Pidcock at one end right through to somebody who's chosen to leave the Conservative Party and join Labour instead. We want to be a broad church because we want to represent this country, and we want to gain power in order to bring forward some of the radical changes that I've been outlining today, just such as addressing people's energy costs with a windfall tax and so on. So we are a broad church. We are united. I'm sorry that Laura felt unable to carry on being on the NEC, which it does take quite a lot of one's time as well as a volunteer. And I think some of her statements suggested that too. But, I make no apology for the Labour Party being open to people who used to support the Tory Party, now turning their attention to wanting to support the Labour Party under Keir Starmer's leadership. And that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. That's what we're about doing.
Mish?
Look, politics is about changing the minds of people, and with our mass mobilising and campaigning ideas, with the millions of people that we have, you can't be voting 400 times with this hard right Tory government over the last 2 years and then suddenly deflect because your seat is at risk. Labour Party hasn't gained any. Labour Party, I'm quite confident, will win Bury South next time. But the point is that two-time elected leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, this was an opportunity at the last NEC meeting when Laura Pidcock and another NEC member brought this motion in to actually, with a plea of unity for the Labour Party, to heal all the wounds. Instead, the leadership and the NEC rejected unity and chose to continue.
Well, look, it's up to Jeremy Corbyn to get the whip back. He knows what he has to do. He has to apologise for the comments that he made in the aftermath of the EHRC report, and apologise and take on board his role in that damning report and what happened then. That's all he has to do. And once he's done that, he'll be given the whip back. That's been made really clear to him, and that's a choice that he's made. It's not a decision for Laura or for you or any other individual member of the NEC. He just needs to apologise. It's not difficult. And look, on Christian Wakeford, I think he's taken a very, very tough decision to leave his old party and join Labour, and he did that because he was deeply uncomfortable with the direction of travel of this Conservative government, who've led to children going hungry in the school holidays and a rise in food bank use and all sorts of things like that. And I'm sorry, we are in the business of changing minds, but we didn't do a very good job of that, did we, at the last general election? In fact, all we did at the last general election was encourage and persuade a lot of people to vote Conservative for the first time, many of whom hadn't ever done so in their lives before. So we've got to look at ourselves here. It's not the voters' fault, it's our fault.
Mish?
Two days before his defection, Christian Wakeford voted to introduce voter ID, disenfranchising millions of people. I don't think it was a difficult decision. It was a decision for the sake of one's political career.
Lucy?
Well, I don't accept that. I mean, look, I've spoken to Christian. Of course, when you're still got the Tory whip, you have to sort of go through the motions. He's been grappling with this for many, many, many months, and it is a very difficult thing to do because you've got all your friends and colleagues in one party who most of whom will never speak to him again, and now he's got to come and try and get himself known in the Labour Party. Very difficult decision for him, and we are a party who wants to see people changing their minds about whether the Conservatives are the right ones to lead the country or whether they think it's Labour who would be best to lead this country. And anyone who wants to change their mind about that is welcome.
All right, well, you heard it there from Lucy. Kate, is it a good or a bad thing, this defection of Christian Wakeford from the Tories to Labour?
I think that's probably all still to play for at the moment. I think that it's it's difficult for the Labour members in Bury South at the moment. I know I've spoken to some of them on the phone. They're not very happy really about what's happened. They had a candidate. They had someone kind of lined up already who was probably going to run in that seat again. And now they're having to work with an individual who has, a voting record that's just been pointed out by previous guests. And also, it is true, you haven't got Jeremy Corbyn in the party, but then you do have Christian Wakeford. So I entirely understand why this is a very sort of tricky thing that's happened. I just would say quickly, Laura Pidcock was only an MP for 2 years, but she ended up being very, very influential in terms of being the socialist of the party and Jeremy Corbyn's voice.
Well, at one point she was talked about as a leadership.
Yeah, and this thing she said about, the party being hostile to socialists, I actually think that is quite important, because if she feels like that and she feels that she can't even engage with these structures in the party anymore, there's no point her being there. It does sort of give a message, doesn't it, that the socialist side doesn't want to be in the party, they want to be outside, and they want to go back maybe to some of those wider community organisations and try and work on things from that route rather than the institutions of the party.
Well, Mish, you were shaking your head. Why?
Look, I don't think that's true. The Labour Party is our traditional home. The Labour Party is the home of socialists, of working people, of trade unionists and trade union members. Obviously, we are installed in our communities as well, but the Labour Party is our home. The fact that Laura's been made to feel that way is emblematic, as I said, of the divisions within the party and the hostile environment towards socialists by the current leadership. And so it's the leadership who's got to change their attitude, not the socialists ourselves.
Right. Is Christian Wakeford's defection good or bad for Labour, Fraser?
I think it's good insofar as it shows them winning over people who didn't vote Labour before. That's what you need to do to get power.
Have they won him over?
Well, they've certainly persuaded him his career is better off as a Labour MP than it is a Tory MP. I think as a Tory he would be on the verge in that constituency. But what we're seeing now is this a basic split between the Momentum faction, which used to control the Labour Party, and Labour itself. Momentum itself has said it's going to accept members now who aren't members of the Labour Party. Yes. So you can almost see the emergence of a new party here. Now, politics is about broad churches. It's about ex-Tories and it's about socialists. The Labour Party, at its strongest, would be able to encompass both of those people, and they would be able to recognise each other's presence as an overall strength. Now, if you've got Laura Pidcock and others saying, look, I can no longer belong to a party that accepts ex-Tories, first of all, you wonder how she'd feel about ex-Tory voters. But then you see how this is a party which is talking more about ideology than about gaining power. So I think the Conservative Party would look on with this quite pleased. Because if a Labour cannot learn to live with each other's factions, in the same way that the Tories have been not bad at living with the factions of the Tory party, then that is as an indication we're not that serious about winning power.
Mish, what do you say in response? I saw you shaking your head when Fraser talked about Momentum being a challenge to Labour, because it's absolutely true. You can now join the organisation without being a member of the Labour Party. What is the reason for that change, if not a challenge?
Jo, I mean, I take exception to talk from Tory supporters about the talk of factionalism within the Labour Party, when the Tory party is actually, the government is being run by a few people in the 1922 committee. The fact of the matter is that the Labour Party, the Momentum and other organisations within the Labour Party, such as the Fabians or the Socialist Health Association, who are actually affiliates of the party, make it possible to those who aren't Labour Party members to get involved in their work. This isn't something that's out of the box. This is very traditional for other affiliates to do it. Momentum's work isn't just focused on the Labour Party. I mean, power, as we all know, is not only one at the ballot box, it's also one in the streets and in our communities.
Right. So, OK, well, let me put that to Lucy. Is it a challenge, though, this change, what some might see as a breakaway from the relationship with the Labour Party? Oh, I think we've just lost Lucy. Hopefully we'll get her back in a moment. Kate? She's back, actually.
Sorry,
let me just hear from... Go on, it's all right, Lucy, we're back, we can see you and we can hear you, so go ahead.
Sorry, I think it was something on my computer just trying to restart or something. But look, I mean, I was against a breakaway party under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership when Change UK, splintered off from Labour, and I would, very much encourage those involved in Momentum not to go down that road again under Keir Starmer's leadership too. But how they run themselves, it is a matter for them. But as I say, we are a broad church Labour Party. We want to represent the whole country. We want to win that election. That's not about compromising our values and compromising what we stand for, but it is about making sure that we address the priorities that people want us to address, and we have bold, big policies of change at the next election, and that's what we're going to be doing. We
haven't got much time. Mish Rahman, thank you very much for joining us. Problem for you, Christian Wakeford's defection, isn't it, Scott?
Well, a few moments ago, it's a fascinating discussion between Mish and Lucy. For the last 10 years, the Labour Party have been falling out. There were all the divisions exposed live on air.
Problem or not?
Not at all a problem.
All right, that's all we've got time for. Short and sweet there in the final answer. I will be back tomorrow with Politics UK at 12:15, and maybe we'll have an update on the Grey Report. Bye-bye.